Hi, I'm Moji Alawodeyal from the Feminist Buzzkills Live Pod, the only podcast that helps you navigate the news in this post-Roe anti-abortion hellscape. Each week, with co-host Liz Winstead, we dissect all the news from that sketchy intersection of abortion and misogyny with providers and activists working on the ground. The cherry on top is we have amazing comedy guests who help us laugh through the rage. Feminist Buzzkills Live drops Fridays wherever you pod. Listen and subscribe, because when BS is popping, we pop off.
History is messy. It's weird, wild, and anything but boring. Rainy Day Rabbit Holes is a history podcast about unhinged stories that make you stop and ask, wait, is this real life?
From crazy disasters and tasty scandals to enlightening and surprising heartwarming tales, we explore the moments where people behave badly and sometimes beautifully.
We've got naughty politicians, cultural chaos, and a deep love for the Pacific Northwest, including Bigfoot.
It's thoughtful, irreverent, occasionally serious, and always entertaining.
Let's fall down the rabbit hole.
MSW Media.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
Do you love badass women of history? Then you need to meet Klondike Kate, the Queen of the Yukon, and her unexpected connection to Tacoma's Pantages Theater. Join Shea and Jody of Rainy Day Rabbit Holes for a special live podcast event, Wednesday, September 16th at 7 p.m. at the beautiful McMenamins Elks Temple in Tacoma, Washington. It's a night of storytelling, local history, and a few truly questionable life choices that somehow all lead right back to Tacoma. We'll also be doing a meet and greet from 6 to 6:30 p.m., so come say hi before the show. Get your tickets at rainydayrabbitholes.com and come find out why all roads lead to Tacoma. Hey, rabbit holers. This week, I've got a special treat for you. A couple of months ago, I joined my big brother Jason for an episode of Midday Movies, where we sat down with Laura and Steven to talk about one of my all-time favorite films, Ridley Scott's 1982 classic, Blade Runner. We dove into the movie's stunning visuals, its richly imagined world, and some of the big ideas that make it such an enduring film: empathy, memory, identity, and the moral questions surrounding artificial life. Fair warning, Jason and I love this movie so much that we may have accidentally taken over the podcast for a while. So huge thanks to Laura and Steven for being such good sports. Give the episode a listen, and while you're at it, be sure to follow Midday Movies wherever you get your podcasts. See you down the rabbit hole.
Hey, this is Laura.
And Steven.
And Shea.
And Jason.
And this is our podcast, Midday Movies, where we take our lunch break to talk about the movies that are on our mind.
Today, we're discussing the 1982 cyberpunk cult classic, Blade Runner. Joining us are the co-hosts of Rainy Day Rabbit Hole's History Unhinged podcast, siblings Shea and Jason, for whom Blade Runner is a movie that made them. Together, we're discussing the timeless tale of replicants attempting to survive end-stage capitalism in a post-apocalyptic Los Angeles, pursued by agents of the state, doubts about the nature of identity, and the underlying threat of a minuscule 4-year lifespan. Let's get into it.
Well, hello, Steven. How are you doing?
Hi, Laura. I'm doing phenomenal, man. I'm doing amazing. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, but I'm even more interested in the following things, which is Shea, Jason, welcome, and how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, super happy to be here today.
Dude, I'm so excited to have you guys because we're discussing 1982's Blade Runner, and you guys are super fans, which means you are super valuable.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
I might.
We are jazzed to have you here. We do enjoy some Blade Runner, but y'all have like deep lore, and we really want to get into it and want to get your perspective. You know, we talk about the films we appreciate. So tell us what you appreciate. What's your perspective? And I think one of the first things we wanted to talk about is like, what is the first time that you've watched this movie? When was the first time you saw this movie?
I don't know if my memory goes back that far.
Back in
Remember,
the
I'm a
eons of
47-year-old
time.
human adult, and I saw this. You know, my brother probably introduced this movie to me when I was a teenager, so I probably would have seen it in the early to mid 1990s. So probably at least a decade or more after it came out. So don't remember the first time, but I do know that it really resonated with the emo living inside of me at the time, that gothic girl that really wanted to come out but wasn't allowed to.
Yeah.
Beyond wearing some black. That was as far as I got with the gothic look.
It made you want to run out in the rain, just wear a lot of black and have neon lights in your background. Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I see it.
My first experience with this movie was not overly positive because I think I was looking for something that was like Star Wars, to be quite honest. So I was looking for that kind of, a little more exciting. And I was like, oh, Blade Runner, this sounds really cool and really interesting. And when I watched it, I was kind of like, oh, man, this thing is slow and boring. And I really don't care. There's not action. There's not spaceships. There's not laser swords and stuff. So I really wasn't super into it at first. And then I came back around after having tasted a little bit of probably some anime and probably Dune, quite frankly, really understanding a little bit more from Alien, that I kind of revisited, and it was like, oh, this is the progenitor of a lot of things. Like, this is something that really should be paid attention to. Or not necessarily, even if it's not progenitor, this is the distillation of a lot of stuff. And then all of a sudden it was on. It was like, oh, yeah, there's something meaty and solid here. And it doesn't have to be, space battles and laser swords to have really good, hard sci-fi. It slowly transitioned into probably my favorite movie.
Both Jason and I are big fans of William Gibson, and Neuromancer, of course, one of our very favorite novels of all time. And I'm wondering, which came first, the William Gibson or the Blade Runner, and how close those were together and how they helped us appreciate each piece of media.
Well, Neuromancer was, I believe, 84. Neuromancer is one of those books that is foundational on how we deal with cyberspace and stuff like the Matrix and that sort of philosophy. And I think it was probably inspired a lot by this film, if nothing else. Again, probably one of my favorite books for a lot of the same reasons why this is one of my favorite movies. Both have a very good ability to set a tone and texture of a world and still populate it with enough character. We don't know every single thing in Deckard's life or Rachel's or Roy's or anything like that. And some of the characters in Neuromancer are the same sort of way. They're just deep enough to hint to a deeper life and more in the world. And I think that that's something really interesting and special on both of the book and the movie, is setting that tone and texture.
Yeah, there's an undeniable energy to Blade Runner. The plot, depending on which version you're watching, is radically different, but the aesthetic of that particular dystopia is unforgettable. Looking at these screenshots even today, they seem so distinctly futuristic, despite being the future of 1982. Me and Stephen have been debating what this world is about because we have a dark sky, we have oil and gas happening in Los Angeles, still being dug out. We have a bunch of people advertising going off world. And is this an LA that's emptying out? It feels somehow, though it's kind of rotting or derelict.
Yeah.
And so is this like end stage capitalism? What is this world?
It does feel like end state capitalism because, again, all these ads saying, go off planet, get out of here. And you've got people like JF Sebastian who are saying they couldn't pass the medical to get off world. So it seems like people are trying to leave, and the people that are left, they're basically in like the carapace of capitalism. They're here, they have all this stuff, but it seems like most of the people that are on this planet are people that are like left over. Like if they could be in outer space, they would be. It's still this beautiful cyberpunk world. And I think it inspired so much of all these cyberpunk worlds that we have later on. I don't know if this was the progenitor of cyberpunk, but it definitely heavily influenced a lot that came after it.
There's been tons of debate on that. There's been books written about that, without a doubt. But I think it definitely plays a part in that. I think it's mentioned in every sort of like cyberpunk noir that comes into play. Like, Neuromancer is a quintessential cyberpunk book. It really is. It's kind of where the term cyberspace came into public consciousness, for lack of a better term. And it literally starts off, the opening line is, "The sky above the port was the color of a television tuned to a dead channel." And when this movie opens, it's that same sort of thing. And this movie opens and it starts off even before you get a single picture with something that I think is one of its strengths. And that's the Vangelis soundtrack. And it just starts off with this boom, boom. And all that does is set a tone. It's like, this is not going to be a happy moment. This is going to be like kind of dark and heavy and kind of oppressive. And Laura, you brought this up when you're like, this is kind of like a Los Angeles that is emptying. They explain why it's emptying with a very offhand comment of like, oh, go off world. But people who can't go off world, this is where you got to live. And that immediately sets a tone of separation between haves and have nots. And we don't really ever see the haves except for Tyrell. And Tyrell represents that as a singular person in this entire film. You don't see a ton of rich people. You just see humanity. And since this movie is all about humanity, you see what would normally be considered like the dregs, in my mind, the dregs of humanity. Not in my mind as like, that's my judgment, but what they're kind of portraying is like, this is just the raw humanity living on the street level. And you have one person who represents that high level, and he lives in a pyramid. And it is, and he's surrounded by luxury and Egyptian mythology and this like almost godlike presence. And in fact, he's referred to as the creator by the people that are coming after him. So obviously Tyrell could go off world if he felt like it, but he has chosen to stay there because of his work and what he's doing. And he's basically a god in this world. They don't show other planets. They don't show off world at all. They just go off world. You don't know if it's good or bad, but hey, why are the rest of the people here and why are they acting the way they are? Is because people have gone off world. It does a really good job without spelling it out for you. Why it looks the way it does, why it's kind of got that dark, gritty tone, and why we don't see anything else. And so I think that's kind of some of the genius of the scene setting that happens pretty rapidly.
No, that's beautiful. The pharaonic imagery of Tyrell is so compelling, particularly because he is the creator of this slave race, right? And we have this strong association with ancient Egypt and slavery and the drama. I'm glad you brought it up. I love the idea of it being sort of this god on earth, because of course, that's what a pharaoh is, and that's communicated by the pyramid, and it's communicated by the way he treats his creations, who have these 4-year limited lifespans, and these escaped replicants. Their goal is just to have more life, which is such a humble goal.
Yeah. You know, in this same thing, in that opening scene and seeing the pyramids, these godlike pyramids, they're the biggest thing in this city, this crowded city. They're the biggest thing. And this goes back to the theme of hyper-capitalism and end-stage capitalism. This corporation has replaced the government. And our strongest, greatest minds have moved off-world. And they've abandoned this world that is, as you said, it's dying. But the corporation that has replaced government holds the utmost power in this world. And so he's chosen to stay because it's now his playground. And even law enforcement seems to work in service of these corporate interests. The replicants themselves, I think, are the biggest indicator of this late-stage hyper-capitalism. You know, right now we're in a world where products are made to be disposable. You know, there's that built-in obsolescence to your phones, to your computers, to your cars now. And the replicant is that. The replicant has a 4-year lifespan. It has planned obsolescence built into it. You have to buy a new one after 4 years. I mean, even their motto, more human than human, but you're going to throw it away.
Yeah.
So that just really strikes me.
Yeah, it communicates so much about how they feel about human beings too.
It's incredibly striking, especially since the reason they give for these replicants to have a 4-year lifespan, I didn't catch it until this time around, but they said it's because they start developing emotions around 4 years in. They start getting more feelings. They pop out fully formed intellectually. They get everything. They understand how to talk. They know how logic works. All of that makes sense to them, but they start developing emotions once they hit 3-4 years. And so they said, you know what? That could be a problem for us. Let's just make them only live 4 years. So they could live longer, but they're basically don't want them to be these fully emotional beings because I think they're worried that they might uprise. They might want to have more rights. I think it would be a big, big problem for Tyrell. So they could have more life, but he's chosen to truncate them.
I disagree with that. I'm going to counter this. But there's a scene where the main replicant, Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, is going to see Tyrell. The way he's gotten in to see Tyrell is via one of Tyrell's engineers. The engineer is still on planet because he has a genetic deficiency in his system. He has Methuselah syndrome, which basically means it's accelerated decrepitude. He's aging rapidly, much like the replicants. And so they go and see Tyrell. And so Tyrell's talking to Batty, and Batty's like, I want more life. What can you do? And Tyrell's going through all the permutations of how to get these things, how to change the DNA. And Sebastian, who has this disease, is sitting there watching from the background. And every time that Tyrell talks about something that could also help him and is shot down, he's seeing his chances for a better life being destroyed each time. And he knows this. He's probably been through it himself, being a genetic designer. But he's hearing the master at this, Tyrell, that is slowly going through, going, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. And Sebastian's just having his worst fears kind of confirmed for how he is trying to basically save his own life, essentially, and get off planet. And so Tyrell comes in and his line is, we made you the best we could possibly make you. And Roy goes, but not to last. And Tyrell's next statement is, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. However, if you go back further in the movie, back to when Deckard realizes that Rachel, one of the other characters in there, is a replicant, he's talking to Tyrell by himself. And Tyrell's very basically talking to Deckard, being like, yeah, they have a 4-year lifespan. And you were right, Stephen, around the time they start developing their own emotions. This to me kind of gets to the heart of what this movie is about, is what it means to be human, even if you are not human. And so Tyrell actually says, when he's talking about Rachel, Deckard's like, how can it not know what it is? He doesn't even say she. He says, how can it not know what it is? Tyrell goes, we gave them memories to control them. That was the key. I was like, oh, you gave them memories to make them more human, to control them. What the memories that they had determined their personality going forward. So depending on what memories you give them, you now have control over this. So what are we as humans? Are we the sum of our experiences and memories? I don't know. So there's another fantastic cyberpunk anime film out there called Ghost in the Shell. And Ghost in the Shell is a fantastic anime. If you guys haven't seen it, if you guys haven't covered it, I would highly suggest it. And it is also about what it means to be human. And even in the book Neuromancer, they have 2 AIs that represent, different parts of human consciousness, for lack of a better term. You've got ego and id, basically, in the AIs in Neuromancer. In Ghost in the Shell, you've got somebody who is a human brain in a cyborg body. The antagonist is an AI trying to get into a body. And so they're looking for kind of the same thing. Like, what does it mean to be human? And it's those kind of memories. And that's where it comes back to this film, is they implant the memories. They give them the memories to control them, which I thought was just like insidious and fantastic. And it's like you were making them more human by giving them memories, but you're putting them more and more under your control by what you give them for memories. And this doesn't even get to start into like the feelings that these replicants are developing on their own, because they have obviously developed feelings. They are taking pictures and photographs, and eyes and photographs are massively important in this film. It literally starts off the film with like a shot of Roy's eye with the landscape reflected in it, which is also Egyptian. And it talks about photographs. Photographs play a huge part in this thing. But the photographs that the replicants that have come back to Earth are of their group. So they have obviously started forming these feelings. And where would you want more life when I'm starting to develop these feelings that are my own, that are not incepted in me? So they're kind of the antithesis to Rachel, who has photographs of a life that's not hers, whereas they have photographs of a life that they've made over 4 years.
And I'm glad you bring up the memories. That's an excellent point about the memories being used to control them. The content of these memories always struck me. These implanted memories always seemed traumatic. They seemed fear-based. Like there's one where Rachel has a memory that her brother showed her his parts, and then she was too afraid to show hers. A very traumatic memory. Another memory of a spider laying eggs, and then the eggs hatch and then eat the spider that laid the eggs. All of these memories would make you distrust people. They would just fill you with fear and anxiety. And I do see how, as humans, if we have these traumatic memories, they can control us. But I also see how if we were engineering a race of replicants to be controlled, putting memories in them that basically induces trauma and not really a happy childhood would be an excellent way to keep them controlled.
I'm so glad we brought up memories being these foundational elements of their consciousness. I think it's important because it's actually a chain of philosophical thought, which is the core question, what makes a person? Mm-hmm. And René Descartes is the first one to sort of address this in the modern age. And we have Pris quoting him directly, I think, therefore I am. The idea that if you can think, you are a person. But this idea is further pursued in philosophical history. Notably, we're talking about memories, meaning that we're talking about the psychological continuity theory. And this is pioneered by John Locke. We love a social contract philosopher, but he's the founder of this theory, and he argues that consciousness, which is rooted in memory, makes a person. So in his view, you are the exact same person as your younger self, simply because your current consciousness can extend backward to remember the experiences of your past self. And this is further developed in the 20th century by Derek Parfit, who, as a modern proponent, refined the idea into psychological connectedness, arguing that identity is less about a strict all-or-nothing rule and more about overlapping chains of memories and psychological traits. So this is clearly an effort to define a psychology, the embedding of memory. But there are questions about this. The question has been pursued even further into the 21st century, where the question is, if you have amnesia, are you still the same person that you were without memories? And the answer usually in social behavioral contexts, when people respond to questionnaires, if they think they're themselves without memory, without whatever, the without that everyone stops at is values. So people feel that they are themselves as long as they retain connectiveness to their original value set. I think that's really interesting because we are discussing memory first as a creation of identity, and now in this conversation as an initiatory controlling mechanism. I would ask if we can identify any values shared amongst the replicants that might nurture our current idea of what identity is philosophically.
It relates back to emotions as well, because they have only had 4 years to develop their own memories. We don't know for sure if they were implanted with any memories upon inception or not. It kind of seems like they're saying no because he's doing this experiment with Rachel where he's implanted memories in her. So they've formed these memories, and somehow they've formed this bond between these replicants that have come back from off-world. And you see that in the relationships and bonds that they've built together. They obviously look out for one another. They mourn. I mean, the last scenes when Roy finds Pris's body are heartbreaking. Yeah. He howls like an animal. He kisses her and spreads the blood on his lips. You can see he is so emotionally distraught by this. And it's hard to say that something that feels that deeply because of this bond that they formed with this other creature is not human, is not of value. Besides the very end scene with him on the roof, I think that just one moment is the strongest for showing that these individuals have value as much as Deckard. In fact, their empathy is more so than Deckard at that point, because Deckard's, we don't know how many replicants that he's killed.
The empathy component is a huge factor here, Shea. And like, I watched Blade Runner. I've watched Blade Runner 2049, and I've never said to myself, these creatures that are made of flesh and blood that were created in a lab seem anything less than human. They always seem very, very human, especially in Blade Runner. All of the replicants to me seem incredibly human. It's odd to me that they're even having this conversation. I think it's about control for them trying to keep these replicants under lock and key. If they were fashioned out of mechanical parts, if they didn't have a beating heart and they had some other mechanism, I think a lot of our emotions come from just having a physical body. I think a lot of what makes us human comes from having a physical body. And so these replicants, as far as I understand, they have actual physical human bodies. They just were created in a lab versus, born of a human.
But they're also like kind of genetically superior to humans in a lot of ways. They're stronger, et cetera, et cetera. And remember too, like the memories that were implanted in Rachel were not created. They were actually from Tyrell's niece.
Yeah.
And there were some traumatic things in there, but that's kind of part of being human, those touch points. But she also carries around pictures of not her, but supposedly her with her mother. So there's still good stuff in there. There's got to be good memories and stuff like that. They just picked out certain things.
Piano lessons.
Yeah, stuff like that. So, and then to Laura's point, when Pris is quoting Deckard is literally like, I think therefore I am. And Roy's next line is, now show him why. And she does like backflips and stuff. And Roy's like, yeah, we're physical, Sebastian. We're here. Like, but what's really interesting is throughout all of this, even though and this goes back to something Shea said, is in social contracts and social values, where a lot of our values come from are from social. There's something about them and how they act that Sebastian picks out right away that they're not human. Even though they have developed a Voight-Kampff machine to get emotional response to figure it out, Sebastian figures it out. So he has somehow been able to pick out, like, I know, like, he did literally ask, like, what generation are you? And so I think that's kind of interesting. It's just, there's something a little off. There's something a little off with Sebastian, which may be why he understands that. Also, he's a genetic engineer, probably does that as well.
He said he makes his friends. His friends are toys that he makes, and they look like they are also some sort of not completely artificial creature.
Yeah.
This is what he surrounds himself with. He's able to pick them out, like Jason was saying, more so than the regular Joe on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We just as viewers kind of can identify their increased empathy. They have a childlike quality, right? A softness to them that is absent from the rank and file members of Los Angeles. Like, one of the things that really strikes me about Blade Runner is that though replicants are hunted down and retired, quote unquote, they are not treating human beings really much better. Like, I think if they could get away with it, they would also hunt down and retire human beings. Because you have Deckard being pulled into Bryant's office, him threatening him with that little people line and what it would mean. This is a world that devalues humanity. And that's what makes replicants such a salient metaphor, because they seem so much more human. They have the childlike connective quality of the best parts of humanity that we really like. The willingness to connect, and they're like making friends. Pris very quickly gets very close to our genetic engineer. They are inhuman because they love or connect so willingly, behaving in a fundamentally different way.
Yeah, and I mean, every one of them is willing to murder without a doubt. Like, they're all happily to survive. They're like, we don't really care. We're going to just kill whoever. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because Pris, she's just doing it to manipulate Sebastian. She doesn't care about Sebastian. She's just getting close to him to be able to introduce Roy so that they can go and see Tyrell. For a being who does not have that much experience, the fact that she's able to do that well and that quickly is really interesting. How she goes about it. She plays on his sympathies. And that's something I hadn't really considered all the times I watched this, like, until just now. It's like, yeah, wow, for somebody who has no experience, is supposedly, not even in like that human society, like, that's a societal thing. To be able to do that and manipulate somebody and have that happen is just, it's really interesting.
You mentioned their childlike demeanor. I mean, having only been alive for 4 years, there's a childlike lack of impulse control as well. You see that when Roy Batty murders Tyrell. he is killing that one person that could actually implement his life expansion, even though he's saying that he can't now, which, we could get into whether or not that's a lie or not. But in that disappointment and rage, crushes his maker's skull in a way that, like a toddler not getting their way might break something. And I think the childlikeness comes forth most in Leon. He's the most simple of them all. And you see, he has that connection to those photographs. He wanted his photographs and just the way
precious photos.
Yeah, the way he interacts with Roy Batty, he really does come across as the most childlike, which makes you feel more empathy for these characters. In contrast to Bryant, who has pure child molester vibes. I'm sorry. And
he's a bad dude.
The way he talks about them, calling them skin jobs, obviously incredibly derogatory, incredibly dehumanizing, to make it easier to take them out and murder them.
Like even when he tells Deckard, he's like, there's 4 left. And Deckard's like, no, there's 3. He's like, no, Rachel disappeared. Turns out she was a replicant. Job. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he kind of smiles. He's kind of like, all right, what do I care? Another replicant dead,
and You mentioned before when he said to Deckard, if you're not cop, you're little people. So if you don't do this, you're at the level of these replicants. It also shows that world in which we live, especially with the police state that's happening in that world and throughout all the Blade Runner media.
So since we're talking about police state, I'd kind of like to get your guys' tone and feeling about Gaff.
We have taken over your
sorry. I'm just kind of curious.
That's why you're here.
Y'all are the guests. That's why you're here.
Character of Gaff. I kind of I'm really curious to see what you guys thinking about him and his characterization.
Okay, so I have my own conspiracy theory that I developed watching this, which was, much like in Blade Runner 2049, I feel like everyone who is retiring replicants is also a replicant, because they talked about who replaced Deckard, and they're like, I mean, he's fine as long as you remember to plug him in. And I'm like, that's a weird thing to say with no further information about this man. And there's something about Gaff that is also distinctly inhuman. Maybe it's the origami interest, which is charming and far too whimsical for this land. Maybe it's his strange contacts they put on him to make him look slightly unreal.
Yeah, there's something about him too that's interesting, because this world is set. Philip K. Dick's idea was that by this time, by I think it was originally set like
2019. Yeah, and it was 7 years ago.
The original book was originally set, I think, more in 2007 or about a decade earlier.
Yeah.
Anyway, his idea was that Japan and China had become such technological powers that they basically were the economic powers of the world. And so that's why we see so much Japanese and other Asian influence in this scene. And Gaff, to me, and I think the actor is Hispanic, but he comes across as very much like he could be Asian. It fits in really well with the world. And that's one thing that struck me. And then his language that he uses, the city speak, which is
the patois.
Is this patois that, you're not quite sure what it is, what the language is. Some people like understand Esperanto. It. Deckard doesn't for some reason.
No, see, that's
would.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, if you're watching with the voiceover, then it's explained that it's a mishmash of English and Japanese and Spanish and German and blah, 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 blah. It's everything.
So what's really funny is the scene where Gaff comes to get him the first time, and he's literally sitting down to eat at this thing, and he's talking to the proprietor of the sushi bar or wherever he's at that he's sitting down to eat noodles. And
he's like 4.
Yeah, he's like, no, 2, 4.
4.
And he's like, and noodles, fine, whatever. So, but he sits down and he's like, the guy is talking to him, Gaff is talking to him, and the proprietor understands him. He says, "You're under arrest." He says, "You're under arrest." He's like, "Yeah, you got the wrong guy, pal." He's like, "You were Blade Runner," and so Deckard is 100% understanding him, because then Gaff says something and he's like, "Bryant, huh?" And he's like, "Okay, fine." And that was Edward James Olmos's idea, was to do that kind of like Esperanto thing. It's really funny because Gaff is kind of the flip of Deckard in a lot of ways, because Deckard's kind of sloppy and Gaff is like super put together with the hat, all the stuff, always clean, prim, proper, tight. And it's kind of interesting that if there is a replicant, it's probably not Gaff, it's probably Deckard. And that's something that Ridley Scott has always maintained. He's like, yeah, I didn't want there to be a definitive answer. He thinks that Deckard is a replicant. That's where he's gone with it. And we can talk about the eyes again, where people's eyes kind of glow. And Ridley Scott did that on purpose. He did that with a light splitter. And so he's like, yeah, we wanted to have this happen. And so it was a real owl they used, same sort of thing. And they did that. So there's a couple scenes where Deckard has that as well when he's talking to Rachel. And it's funny because Rachel's eyes go back to more human and Deckard's become a little more replicant. The irony that Gaff is human but is like super put together, and the sloppy dude Deckard is the replicant, I always think is really interesting. For me, though, all the little origami that Gaff leaves around is really important. I think that it's really cool because he does like the little matchstick men. He literally pulls a match, like a wooden match out, makes this little matchstick man. He kind of just does it in the background. You don't really notice, but then he leaves it down and it's this matchstick man or a unicorn. And I think that's really interesting how Gaff is not a major character, but it's kind of like a through line. And Gaff never really speaks to Deckard in any way that's not that patois. That's really interesting. It's almost like he's trying to take his job or something like that. I don't know, but
I have read things about that Gaff hates Deckard because I think it was Gaff was injured, which is why he walks with a walking stick and a bit of a limp, and that he hates Deckard and he does not want to see Deckard succeed. And you can see him mocking Deckard with his origami, with the chicken and the matchstick man that has an erection.
Oh, I missed that.
And the final origami, the unicorn. And this is one of the big differences between the theatrical cut that you guys watched and the final cut, which is the best of all of them, is that unicorn specifically refers to a scene that was added for the final cut. And that's a kind of daydream sequence. Deckard is playing the piano and kind of dozing off because he's drunk. And this scene of a unicorn running through the forest comes on. Then at the end, Gaff leaves this unicorn origami. And people argue about what that meant. But the strongest argument is that Deckard is a replicant, that this is one of the implanted memories. And the reason that Gaff knew about the unicorn is because he knows Deckard is a replicant and he knows about this memory. And so this is just a sign from Gaff, another final tease saying, I know what you are. And even his last words to Deckard, it's a shame she won't live. But then again, who does? I think is a jab from Gaff to Deckard saying, like, you're not going to live either. So,
yeah, I also do like the running of the miniatures of animals and people because it's sort of reflective of the world too, where we have this owl who's artificial. We have one of the replicants using a snake in a stage show, but it's a fake snake. We can guess that organic creatures are rare, gone, or illegal because in the test that they're doing on Rachel, one of the questions is, someone gives you a calfskin wallet, what do you do? And she's like, I report them, I do not accept it. Someone talking about the snake is saying, I couldn't afford a real snake. There is a dearth of organic material in here, but there is an abundance of fakes. And I think it's interesting that we also have Gaff producing little fake animals too, because that is in micro scale the entire society.
So the animals are, they seem like they're just background in this movie. But this is one of the direct connections to Philip K. Dick's book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Because in that world, the world that Deckard is living in comes after multiple world wars and a nuclear event. So, which is why people are moving off-world. People that are living on-world still are dealing with the effects of nuclear fallout. And if they are found to be deficient, they're not allowed to go off-world. And one of the things is most animal life has died out because of this nuclear event. And so real animals are very expensive and highly prized. And this kind of weird thing about the book is that a social status symbol was whether or not you owned a real animal. And so people would have they'd live in these tenement apartments, but then they'd have a rooftop terrace. That's where they would keep their animals. And Deckard had a synthetic sheep. That was his animal, but he longed for a real animal. His neighbor had a real horse. And so one of the things in the book early on was him he was going to go after these replicants because he wanted the money so he could buy his wife a real animal. And he checked in on pricing for a real ostrich, which is why we see the ostriches in that one scene where they were kind of in the animal market. And this is why the animals and the synthetic animals are so prevalent in the movie. Now, I do have to mention one scene. I don't know if it was in the theatrical cut, but in the final cut, he finds that scale in Leon's bathtub, right? And he takes it down to the animal market to the woman to see, is this a fish scale? No, it's a snake scale. But when he's coming up to her, as the camera is moving around to focus in on them, there's this archway. And there's this like fake bird, not like a synthetic bird, like a plastic fake bird sitting on top of the archway. And as somebody is moving through the scene, they bump the arch. And right before the camera moves away, that bird falls off the arch. But it got left in the movie. And it just makes me giggle every time. Little things like that. But yeah, the animals are, the importance of the animals ties back to the book, for sure.
So yeah, that's one of the things with where Zora is talking about the snake, and she's like, yeah, do you think I'd be working here if I could afford a real snake? I thought was really interesting. Just as a quick thing about animals and people owning animals, Joanne Cassidy is the actress of Zora. And so when she was looking at the part, she was reading for the part and stuff like that. And she basically like called Ridley Scott up and was like, you have to give me this part because I have an actual snake. So, and that was her snake that was in the film. It was her. She's like, I know how to act with the snake because I have a snake. And so that was literally her snake that was in the film, which I just thought was rad. That was such a cool little touch.
Nice.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm a huge Ridley Scott fan. I don't really think that this is like Ridley Scott at his peak. However, I think that so much stuff came together on this film that everything's kind of fell into place, even though there was a lot of tension, a lot of stuff, and they were like tons of night shooting. There was like 6 weeks of night shooting. Where they shot at with the Bradley building, they had to put back together every morning because it was an actual working office building. Like all the stuff that they did, and he was super tight on money on some of these things. They didn't have a lot of the effects capabilities that they have. So they're like, yeah, we had to frame the shot with the spinner, the flying cars in there because we didn't have a really good way to remove the wires that were holding them in there. And some of the original cuts, you can still see the wires for the spinners and stuff bringing them down. And they're like, yeah, we just kind of tried to hide them as much as we could. And so I think there's a lot of things that came into play, and there was things that the actors did. There was things that Ridley Scott did. There was things that the production managers did and the designers on it that kind of all came together to make this kind of incredible film.
Yeah, it's clear that there was a very, very strong vision coming from Ridley Scott to cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth to everyone on this staff. Notably, the cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth confirmed that Ridley Scott felt the style of photography in Citizen Kane most closely approached the look that he wanted for Blade Runner, specifically the high contrast, unusual camera angles, and the use of shafts of light. Jordan Cronenweth also used a lot of cracker oil for this, which is not allowable safe today. It is not safe for humans, but it did create we've stopped using it since, but it did create this incredibly smoky, beautiful, dystopian look that you see when these replicants and Deckard are running through these scenes and they're running through this heavy, heavy smoke. That's all the cracker oil effect and all of this intense lighting that Cronenweth and Ridley Scott collaborated on. So yeah, like it's clear that this was just so beautifully designed.
Yep.
Well, and I like that you pointed out that it shared stylistic nodes with Citizen Kane because you do see the foreground, the middle ground, and the background being in crisp focus in every single scene.
Yeah, almost. And I would disagree with that with like some of the internal, like Tyrell's apartment and Deckard's
I guess
apartment.
I was talking about exteriors.
They're kind of smoky and foggy. And what's really interesting is if you look at like any sort of production stuff of like let's say Deckard's apartment, it looks like a real apartment, and some of the production designers are like, yeah, you could have like lived here.
This is what I've been waiting to mention. Right. Okay,
go ahead, Shea. What do we got?
Apartment. Okay, so this is very cool. So just talking about some of the anatomy of the movie. So his apartment was the Innes house, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Los Feliz. And this house is amazing. It has an amazing history. You got to just get on and read about the history of this house and the struggles that this house has gone through. It was built using 27,000 blocks that are patterned. So they're cast blocks and in this like Mayan revival style. And so they actually filmed quite a few scenes inside this house. So there's a scene where he's kind of like driving down into his parking garage. That is the actual parking garage of the house. Some of the scenes inside, they brought in all these fiberglass panels to set up his apartment to use for the sliding doors. And it does have a kind of tomb-like feel. And when you're in his apartment, it has that tomb-like feel and old and crumbling because the Innes house was crumbling. It was falling apart. It has taken millions of dollars of renovation just to keep it from being literally condemned. It was partially condemned for quite a while. I absolutely love that use of that. And then the other one is the Bradbury building that Jason mentioned, where on the outside, the Bradbury building is very kind of not that exciting. You wouldn't look at it and be very excited, but the inside is where it really lives. With those lattice ironwork and those elevators that are still in existence today. And they really do help set the scene, especially the Bradbury building, the inside, because you see like there's debris everywhere, there's puddles everywhere. And J.F. Sebastian says, yeah, there's no shortage of housing around here because everybody's gone off world. So you have these massive buildings that are pretty much empty. So you can live there alone, but it's falling apart around you.
Yeah.
That shot into the apartment building is one of my favorite scenes, and it took something like 12 different passes of filming that to get all those lights through because that's all practical, and that blows my mind. That's crazy.
Dude, the interior of the Bradbury is unequaled in gorgeousness. Okay, so Shea, you brought us Mayan revival architecture inside Deckard's house. Compare that then to Tyrell's like pharaonic pyramid, because they're two cultures that have pyramids, but they are deeply opposing.
Yeah, very, very
in a lot of ways. I love that the two influences exist and sort of act as antagonistic architecture towards each other, if you think about it. A Mayan pyramid is about religion and religious festivals for people, and a pharaoh's pyramid is about the tomb-like quality, but just a tomb to one man.
So what's really interesting is in the designs that they were looking at doing for Tyrell, and there was even a scene when Roy shows up, he would go into the heart of the pyramid, and there was a sarcophagus with essentially the original Tyrell entombed in the sarcophagus in the middle of the pyramid, which makes a ton of sense. This could easily be a Tyrell, has memories of being Tyrell, but is just recycled every 4 years. So it put some plot holes and stuff, but it was kind of an interesting thing. When I heard that, I was like, oh, there's a lot of stuff that makes sense. Ridley Scott, I don't think he necessarily super consciously went after a lot of these details. It was like, oh, this just kind of feels right. Because even in Sebastian's apartment, Sebastian is kind of also has this childlike wonder about him. And he's got almost like a Ren Fair jacket on. He has all these weird, little creatures in his house. But then he also has a stuffed ostrich in his house. And then the chess game that he's playing with Tyrell is all birds. All the pieces are birds. And then when he's talking to Pris and Roy, what generation are you? He's like, yeah, I do genetic design work. There's some of me in you, which is like, oh, advanced decrepitude, Methuselah syndrome, 4-year lifespan. There's some of me in you. Is that where that came from? Which makes Sebastian's scene with Tyrell later on, where he's watching what Tyrell is saying, is like, oh, can Tyrell potentially fix me? I think in a lot of those. And Roy, it's off screen, but Roy actually kills Sebastian after he kills Tyrell, because it's brought up later on. It's like, yeah, there's two dead bodies. So Roy just is like, sorry, Sebastian, you got to go.
The world that they've built really sets a scene to enhance the sense of loneliness. I think that's one of the running themes throughout not only this film, but 2049, the loneliness. Deckard lives alone. He eats alone. He drinks alone. He doesn't seem to have any social connections outside of work, and he's retired at the beginning of this movie. So it doesn't seem that he actually interacts with human beings in a meaningful way beyond just, capitalist transactions. And same thing with J.F. Sebastian, he makes his friends. It's a lonely person who had to make his friends living alone in this giant building. And even
which is
when
more
you're
sad,
down on,
Sebastian or Deckard?
I think that Sebastian has found a way to not be lonely by making his friends. Deckard's miserable. Deckard's a waste of space at this point.
Yeah, and how Blade Runners are treated.
Anything.
Blade Runners are like, oh, you're a Blade Runner. Like, we're kind of afraid of you, but you're also like, but you kill people. Like, you're scum. But then Bryant's like, Blade Runner, if you're not cop, you're a little person. I think Sebastian does have a friend. I think it's Tyrell in a weird way.
Oh, yeah, because they're playing chess.
Right.
Well, they can understand each other. Tyrell and Sebastian are both creating creatures, creating a legacy. Sebastian very literally, Tyrell conceptually, since he came up with the technology, and Sebastian is more like the executor of that technology.
Yeah, and they are playing with their created friends because Tyrell created Rachel for his own amusement.
Yeah.
That's why she's so special.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know for his amusement, but definitely as a test bed, I think, for something. And
that would amuse him.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I think it's a means to an end. And it's really interesting, the dichotomy between those two characters, because you've got the genetic designers and you've got one of them who's super childlike and he's got toys and he's got a pool table. And then you go to Tyrell's room and it's this big giant bed and there's like insane amount of candles in here, which you got to figure
and luxury,
like super luxurious to have candles and not neon. Sebastian's room is just a riot of color and texture and everything going on. And Tyrell's, it's white. Like they're white candles. There's gold. His chessboard is standard, like kings, queens, rooks, very ornate. And so there's a dichotomy between even those two characters that I think is really interesting that comes into play. And I love the actor that played Tyrell. He was in The Shining. He's been in a bunch of other stuff. He was the bartender in The Shining.
Yeah, he was Lloyd.
Oh, that's Lloyd.
Lloyd. A couple years before this movie came out. Yeah.
I heard a very interesting little bit of trivia last night about the scene where Roy kisses Tyrell. So originally, the very first time they shot that, the actor playing Tyrell French kissed Rutger Hauer, stuck his tongue in his mouth. And he said after, like when Roy was like, whoa, or when Rutger Hauer was like, whoa, he was like, I don't know what came over me. I just had the urge.
Rutger Hauer's a good looking dude,
I mean, he was
by this Dutch actor and his beautiful face.
37 years old at that time. Super. Yeah. I just thought that was funny because there is a little bit of like father-son, creation. But there is a weird sexual tension moment in that one scene where he goes to kiss him and it becomes more than a father-son kiss. It's really interesting. And so I think that actor kind of picked up on that weird tension that was happening. And it just, I don't know if that actor is gay or not, or if he was just inspired by Rutger Hauer's beauty.
I mean, Rutger Hauer is an interesting dude. Anyways, Rutger Hauer was cast without Ridley Scott ever having met him. And so they're like, oh, this is totally crazy. Like a lot of these people got cast, even Rachel, Sean Young, she was super young. She got cast for her looks. Rutger Hauer, kind of the same thing. And then Rutger Hauer, when he actually meets Ridley Scott, shows up and Ridley Scott's talking about this. He's like, it's this puce jumpsuit, like zipper jumpsuit. He's got almost like a fox stole on. And so like this super crazy like outfit. And Rutger Hauer is basically just messing with him, So it's like, yeah, this is crazy. He's just kind of messing with it. That Rutger Hauer turned to his casting director after the first meeting. He was like, what have you brought me? And he had already had like his hair cut in like this short spiky hair and the whole bit. And then of course he turned out to be perfect. I mean, he literally ad-libbed probably the best line in the entire movie. So
yeah. And it turns out
memories will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
Yes. Yes. Rutger Hauer brings in such intense and consistent improvisation to this. It's not just those lines.
Such European vibes.
And such European Dutch vibes. It's great. Apparently he improvised a ton of lines and a ton of the things he did. There's that scene where he's caressing the dove on the roof. That is also improvised. That is all Rutger Hauer.
Yeah, he's like, I can make that jump. Yeah, with the dove in hand.
Oh, he's just jumping with that part? He came out.
The dove is a power-up.
Of course he did.
In his undies. For some reason, his undies and tennis shoes.
I mean, even
here's the thing about Rutger Hauer. He is bringing so much sexuality to the screen in all of these scenes, even with the dove. And I know that we are meant to understand that he and Pris are in a romantic relationship and there's intense sexuality there. But he is just pouring sexuality.
Yes,
both
at all
of them.
times.
Yeah, I mean, Pris was
like even in the scene where he's talking to the eye maker, going through trying to get as close as he can to Tyrell by going up Tyrell's little underlings, there is still a strangely sexual quality to like the stripping him down in the cold and asking him questions.
The thing about that scene that struck me, such a weird touch, is when Leon puts the eyeball on his shoulder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's that about?
It was so weird. I don't know what the point of it was. It was just, and again, maybe that just goes back to Leon's like super childlike demeanor of like, oh, this would be gross and funny if I put this on your shoulder. It tickled me pink. There are comedic scenes and notes in this movie amongst all the darkness. And, and maybe this is a good place to talk about the ending.
Yes.
Can I talk about Daryl Hannah really quick?
Yes, please.
Okay,
talk about Daryl Hannah and the fact that she did those backflips.
I know. That was the thing that she told Ridley Scott. She's like, oh, yeah, I did gymnastics. He's like, so tell me what you mean by gymnastics. And she just does a backbend for him. And he was like, done. And then she does it in the film. I was like, yeah. And she's also, she's got like the thigh high fishnets or whatever they were. And I was like, that may have awakened something in Jason.
Her legs alone are like 5 feet long.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. But she also kind of like, unknown, but she just absolutely killed it as well. Like it's all the actors they pick for this are all, phenomenal.
So the big difference between, like one of the biggest difference, we've already talked about the unicorn scene, between the theatrical cut and the final cut is the ending. So in the theatrical cut, there's kind of a happy ending, right? He drives off into the field with Rachel and you're like, maybe this is all going to work out. Yay.
Unused footage from The Shining.
That's right. And in the final cut, you get that. And I don't know, in the theatrical cut, was there the scene with the unicorn origami?
Yeah, you see the unicorn outside of Deckard's apartment as he goes in, and he fears finding a dead Rachel. Right. But it's okay. She's asleep. Right. It's all good. That
did happen. But in the final cut, you don't know what happens with them. They get into the elevator, and that's basically it. You don't know what's going to happen at this point. It leaves it kind of ambiguous and dark and up to your own interpretation. It doesn't paint that happy ending onto it. We don't know when Rachel's inception date was. So we don't know what her lifespan was. I think we find out in some of the later films, but maybe in 2049 they might mention it because there is a death date for Rachel in there. So So we don't know. And if Deckard's a replicant, it does bring up these questions of like, well, he's obviously been a Blade Runner for a while, so he doesn't have the standard replicant 4-year lifespan if he is a replicant. So that also brings into question, like maybe they've built Rachel that way too. So we don't know what their lifespans are supposed to be. The fact that Deckard shows up in 2049, I think belies the idea that he is a replicant. So
I would agree.
Yeah.
So I think even though Ridley Scott says, I wanted to make you think he's a replicant.
So you're saying they deleted the happy ending from this movie in which they used parts from another movie, which is, known for having a very happy ending, The Shining, to give it an unhappy ending.
Everybody wins.
I mean,
hotels get burned down.
The good guys get out, and one very toxic marriage ends.
That is true.
Yeah. So anyway, the big difference there between the two cuts is the ending. And I like the darker, more ambiguous ending that leaves it up to your own personal interpretation personally. That's one of the reasons why I like the final cut the most. And the final cut is darker. They added some of the violence back in as well that you don't see in the theatrical cut. I don't know, in the theatrical cut, did you get to see Tyrell's, Batty's eyes go into Tyrell's eye sockets or not?
I don't. Thumbs going into it.
Oh yeah. You get some thumbs and a lot of violence. It's an 80s level of violence.
Mm-hmm.
But Shea, what you mentioned there, what really sticks with me about it is the ambiguity. Because I've seen the theatrical cut, I've not seen the final cut, but I love that the final cut does that. It lets you steep in the ambiguity. Because all throughout this movie, you're asking yourself, is Deckard a replicant? Is he not? Is Gaff a replicant? Is he not? What are all these origami characters about? What is Rachel's lifespan? We don't know. Why is Rutger Hauer amazing? Why is he doing all of these incredible things? And Why did he save Deckard at the end of it all? So it leaves you steeped in ambiguity, just leaves you with the question, what is real? What is human? Who are we? Why are we here? And I think that's the point of this film, really, is just leading you to ask more questions about why and the nature of existence, the nature of why we're here.
There's so much, like, you don't know if Gaff knows, you don't know if Deckard's a replicant, you don't know incept dates on either of them, so you don't know length.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff comes up. You're just like, we don't know. And the general public does not really like ambiguity. Everybody complained about the end of Inception. We're like, oh, did the top fall or not? You're like, does it really matter? That's the whole point, is you don't know. Yeah. That is the point. And I think a lot of this happened. And I think that's part of the reason why it was not received as well as it was when it came out. And I don't think people really started thinking about Deckard as a replicant until later on, until this kind of hit cult classic status. And I think this has kind of gone through the cult classic cycle and then come out where it's like, no, this really is an excellent film and we're going to do a sequel of it. But at the time, it was released poorly. It was released like 6 weeks after E.T. And people were like, oh, yeah, E.T., it's really lighthearted and sci-fi. And then, oh, this will get released and people will be ready for something heavier. And they were like, no, E.T.'s still rolling. And it just kind of got lost in the wash on that. And then people started getting that deeper. But I think part of what makes this film successful is that ambiguity, is exactly what you said, is like, you just don't know. You don't know about the world. You don't know about like, what is off-world? Are there more replicants? Or is there another generation of replicants that is Deckard and Rachel that do have longer lifespans? Is it going to be 8 years? Is it double? Is it forever? The fact that the Blade Runner sequel had all those things to deal with, and they were like, let's give it a shot, is really admirable. That movie, much like this, was received in some of the same ways. And I think it's like, that movie's going to have to go through, it's like people don't really recognize some of the genius in that movie until many years have passed, unfortunately. And I think we're going to kind of come back around with some of the philosophical questions, and some of the same philosophical questions that are proposed in that film are the same that were proposed in this. And I think that's one of the nice through lines on that, is what does it really mean? And they obviously deal with memories. They have somebody that's actually creating memories in that movie for synthetics. And that's, I think that through line is really intriguing. And I think that's one of the nice things about this movie, is that it did propose all those questions. I think you're right. I think that ambiguity is kind of some of the secret sauce to this movie. And the questions of what it does mean to be human.
What is not ambiguous, though, is the clear legacy of Blade Runner. As you mentioned, it had the direct sequel, Blade Runner 2049, which is one of those rare cases where the sequel is as good, if not potentially better than the OG Blade Runner. We can get into that later. I can see Shea being like, how dare you, blasphemy. But also so much about Blade Runner, like in 1993, it was selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry by the Library of Congress because they said it is culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. In this case, all of the above. It's also the film that brought the work of Philip K. Dick to the attention of Hollywood and led to several film adaptations of his work like Total Recall, Minority Report, and A Scanner Darkly. And, Jason, to your point about Ghost in the Shell, its influence on anime alone is incalculable. Ghost in the Shell, Akira, Cowboy Bebop, Neon Genesis, Evangelion all carry its DNA directly. And we were talking about, is this the first film that cyberpunk came out of? And yes, it is widely regarded as the film that invented the sci-fi subgenre that we now know as cyberpunk. It was also the first film noir in a sci-fi setting. So, for all these reasons and many more, Blade Runner is just a masterpiece of a film. And it has all of these pieces that continue to show why it is such an important and impactful and fun watch, too. There is a lot of humor in it.
I think it's also really interesting that Ridley Scott was on tap to do Dune. And then later on, guess who does the sequel? And then guess who does a remake of Dune? So it's like, you can see some throughput in that, and those are kind of like almost hard sci-fi moments. Like I said, when I first saw this, I was looking for the next Star Wars. Yeah. And Star Wars is not a sci-fi movie. It's a fantasy movie in a lot of ways. It has sci-fi elements or a Western. Yeah. But this was like that strict sci-fi, heady, what is the nature of reality and humanity. I love seeing that genre still continue on in modern sci-fi movies. You guys just did Arrival.
Yeah, we did.
And Arrival is 100% the same sort of thing. What does it mean? Those memories are huge, especially if you don't deal with linear language models. Even some of the stuff was tapped in your guys' Fifth Element review as well, which is fantastic. Another favorite movie of mine for the fun of it, if nothing else. But again, is like, what is humanity is part of that throughput. There's so much that has come through that I think this kickstarted in a subtle way. And I think if it had been more overt and if it had been more well received, I don't think it would have had the impact that it actually did in the end. I think the subtlety of this, the ambiguity of it, the fact that it kind of just burnt in the background and just lingered on is actually what made it have the impact that it did.
Yeah, that it confused people was what made people think about it.
It made them
deeply.
think.
And what I think had an outsized impact on the quality of this episode was having Jason and Shea on to talk about this because, again, I know a bit about Blade Runner, but y'all came in and brought such depth and such passion to this. I think this is going to be a really good one. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for pulling in all of the deep dives and the deep cuts, because this is exactly what we wanted to get into here. But before we do the final wrap up, are there any last pieces y'all want to say before we do your plugs, call out where we can find you, that kind of thing?
I think that maybe some of your listeners that might be in the younger generations may not immediately, if they were to sit down to watch this, get why we love it so much. They probably be bored by it. I would see somebody who's a teenager these days being like, this is boring. But sit down, watch it, watch the background, ruminate on the world and the meanings behind it. You don't need a ton of action and things to be constantly moving in order to create a great film that's entertaining. And this movie proves that. It is a slow burn, but it's definitely worth the patience. And then just getting into the world as a whole. Because don't forget, there's several short films between this Blade Runner 2019 basically, and Blade Runner 2049. And then sometime in the next couple of years, hopefully we have that limited series, Blade Runner 2099. Yeah, cross our fingers. Before then, though, we will hopefully have the Neuromancer short series, which maybe we can talk about Neuromancer when that comes out. But for me, this was one of my favorite movies growing up, still probably my top favorite movie of all time. And today just really made me appreciate it even more. So thank you for having me on.
Thanks for, again, thanks for having me on. I'll echo what Shea said. You don't even have to like this movie. This is kind of a stepping stone to a lot of other things that you may enjoy. And just like me, you may come back to this with a different appreciation in years, much like I did.
It is essential cyberpunk viewing.
Yes, it is. It is. It is the grandfather, the originator of cyberpunk.
So we didn't even get into the fun stuff, like the visuals and things like that. We just got into the philosophy of it all.
Hey, we can always do a part 2.
Those are the visuals of the mind.
Right.
That's right. I'm happy to come back for a part 2 to this, 2049. Anything else you want that's Blade Runner related, I'm happy to be on board.
Same.
All right. That said, do y'all want to say where we can find y'all on the internet?
Yeah, well, I'm Shea. I'm one of the hosts of the Rainy Day Rabbit Holes History Unhinged podcast. Go to our website, rainydayrabbitholes.com. You can find our episodes and links to listen on most and all podcast platforms. And I'm at Rainy Day Rabbit Holes Pod on the internet, on socials, but I don't really do a whole lot on socials because social media sucks. So just listen to the pod. And you occasionally also get to hear my brother, Jason.
Yep, that's right. I am occasionally on Shea's podcast, Rainy Day Rabbit Holes. I am also on another podcast, though, with Laura, Steven, and Shea, playing a notoriously synthetic hating character. Strangely enough, as much as I love this movie, that character is not like synthetics at all. So you can find me on Facehuggers and Friends with Shea and Laura and Steven, playing Freya Yaden and pushing synthetics into danger. So
yes.
Clearly, you're more of a synthetic or replicant lover than a synthetic hater.
Absolutely.
And it's good to see that, because Jason and I have an intense rivalry within the Alien RPG universe.
Yeah, we do. It's so good. Freya, on the other hand, not a fan. So
yeah. Well, that said, folks, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Jason, Shea, Laura, always a pleasure. And dear listeners, if you haven't seen Blade Runner, what are you doing? Go see it. At least watch some clips. I think you'll have an idea of why this is such an important film, what made it have such a long-lasting legacy, and also its impact on cyberpunk as an aesthetic, as a cultural thing. Like, it's got everything. Anyway, that's it, folks. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on the next lunch break. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Midday Movies, your media corner on the internet. Now a part of the Umbrella Podcast Collective. Don't forget to leave us a follow and a 5-star. Check out our shop for tees and totes. And join our community in polls, Q&As, and comments. This has been Steven.
And Laura.
Catch you next lunch break.
Hey, come closer. I've got a secret to tell you. It's Seattle, 1924. Prohibition is in full swing, which means the city is drinking harder than ever. Somewhere behind a locked door, Seattle's most interesting criminals are throwing a party. Bootleggers, smugglers, gamblers, socialites, and a few politicians who definitely shouldn't be there are all raising a glass together. What could possibly go wrong? And somehow, you've been invited. On October 16th, Bootleggers Ball transforms Seattle's historic Oddfellows Hall into a living speakeasy, inspired by the true stories chronicled by Brad Holden in Seattle Prohibition, Bootleggers, Rum Runners, and Graft in the Queen City. Expect immersive theater, live music, social dancing, handcrafted cocktails, and a cast of characters who may or may not be telling you the whole truth. The best part? You don't need a password. Just the courage to walk through the door. As alliances shift and rivalries simmer, you'll find yourself surrounded by the very people who built Seattle's underground empire, and a few ghosts who may never have left. Dress sharp, keep your wits about you, and trust no one. And if someone offers you a drink, well, history suggests that you should probably say yes. I'll see you at the speakeasy. Get your tickets now at strangertickets.com and search for Bootleggers Ball.
It's no surprise that newsmakers try to manipulate the audience. They want you to believe that they are the one holding the line and they'll use any trick they can to get you there. But don't let them fool you. Get unspun. I'm Amanda Sturgill. I've been a reporter, and today I teach future reporters to cut the spin and think critically about what newsmakers say. My podcast, Unspun, shows you how to know when you're being manipulated by the news. Learn to spot the tricks and how to make up your own mind about what's true. So if you're tired of being fooled by the news, subscribe to Unspun today. Unspun, because you deserve the truth.
I'm Brian Karam, and I've spent decades covering politics. Now I'm taking you behind the scenes, one interview at a time.
Join us as each week Brian confronts the issues that matter, posing the questions you wish you could ask. No filter, no agenda, just the truth.
We're not here for sound bites. We're here for substance. Join me, Brian Karam, every week as we cut through the noise and get straight to it. This is Just Ask the Question, where curiosity will lead us to the facts.
Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform, and remember, when you want answers, all you have to do is just ask the question.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.